Welcome to this week's episode of Promising Young Surgeon. This week, we continue to delve into the unique journeys of medical professionals and beyond with Dr. Anthony Chin-quee. He joins us to discuss his truly incredible and varied career. He's an otolaryngologist turned television writer and esteemed memoir author. There's so much we want to cover today, so we'll dive right in. Anthony Chin-quee is an otolaryngologist with degrees from Harvard University and Emory University School of Medicine. He has done multiple performances for The Moth, where he's won their local Story Slam, placed as a runner-up in the Detroit Grand Slam, and performed on their NYC, Chicago, and London main stages. He was a medical consultant for ABC's Grey's Anatomy and a member of the writing staff for Fox's The Resident for 2 seasons, distilling complex medical and social issues into palatable and understandable mainstream storylines. His memoir, I Can't Save You, is a candid account of the ways in which medical residency training shattered the mind of an empathetic, well-intentioned doctor and the arduous task of piecing it back together again through painful and overdue self-discovery. This was released in April 2023 to huge critical acclaim. Anthony currently resides in England with his wife and 2 children. He loves reading young adult fiction, started fostering kittens in the pandemic, and that's what led to his relatively late in life realization that he is a cat person. Thanks so much for joining us today, Anthony. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks. It's so weird hearing my life spelled out for me like that. I feel so important. It's very fancy. I don't really feel like that on a day-to-day basis, so it's cool.
Well, oh, totally. Like once I start having a cool intro like yours, I'm going to tell my family, I'll be like, announce it that way when I show up. Like when I arrive at the party, someone at the door, like, give me one of those.
Exactly. I need that when I show up at the supermarket, just like over the loudspeaker, guys, let's do this thing the right way.
I love that. It's not too long. I think that would be a very reasonable ask from you, I think. Well, and I'd love to just ask, to follow up some of your fun facts. Do you have a current favorite dystopian trilogy in the YA fiction world?
Oh man, a current favorite. I've been reading them for so long, but I think I recently read that I really enjoyed the trilogy by Rebecca Kuang, she wrote Yellowface, but before that she wrote this whole trilogy of fantasy novels kind of set in a fantasy China and Japan. The Poppy War. Yes, the Poppy War is so good.
Oh my gosh. Well, I got to check that out because we have Yellowface and I certainly, what I love is kind of her angle of writing, it's a little bit where coming from the perspective of the character's not a very good writer. And so if the writing isn't really strong, you'd be like, the character, the realism, it's so on point. And so I love tricks like that. And yeah. Of course, we're going to talk about your book today. And I'd love to hear your take on development of yourself, the character. But what's interesting is even if, one of us writes about our lives and they come off like a little neurotic, well, the character is neurotic. So the writing, I guess, permissibly can be.
Yeah, I'm happy to dive into the craft of it, but you hit it right on the head. Writing about yourself writing yourself as a character is a challenge and requires a lot of intentionality that can be easy to kind of dismiss or think you don't have to use as you're writing, but I think it's really important. But I learned so much in the process, so I'd be happy to chat about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to allow everyone to get to know you and a little bit of your background and story, I would love to hear about some of the early life, the decision to choose medicine. And of course, then I love to jump into both of our experiences as children of immigrants who maybe had a more limited subset of careers to choose from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think we're probably gonna see some similarities when I share the story. But so I'm from Brooklyn, New York. Grew up there. until I went off to college. And yeah, my dad is an immigrant from Jamaica. My mom was born in the States, but her whole family is from Trinidad. So we're part of the island community, a very strong community in New York, especially. And it's funny because I wasn't necessarily pushed into thinking about medicine from a young age, but I remember as a kid, that's what I thought I wanted to be. And as I've grown up, I've kind of realized that coming from my cultural background, and I think from many immigrant cultural backgrounds, if you're the smart kid, there's a handful of professions you're encouraged to go into or you're made aware of as options. When your family kind of tells you about, these sorts of futures, like be a doctor, be a lawyer, be an engineer, be, this, that, they're usually, done with the hope that you will achieve this goal. It's a type of profession that the world will always need, so you'll never need to look for another job. Your future and your present will be steady and safe, right? Which I always, now that I'm an adult, I always think is really fascinating, because you have these parents who are immigrants. They did maybe the most brave and adventurous thing you can do is pick up your entire life and leave,
right,
and start over someplace else where you think you can do something else. And, I understand the sentiment of, maybe not wanting your kids to have to struggle the way you did, or deal with any issues that came along with it. But at the end of the day, the genes are the same. We're the same adventurous people as our parents, and we have those same tendencies, and we're gonna want to be adventurous, maybe in different ways. So that's kind of a perspective I've kind of embraced as I've gotten older, and has made it kind of okay for me.
I love that.
To give myself kind of permission to try new things.
And that's just so poignant, and certainly a lot of it resonates with me. My mom escaped the Cultural Revolution in Shanghai, so she came to the U.S. at 40 and had me a few years later. But I really love the quote, and one thing I was thinking of that came to mind as you were talking was, your ancestors gave you more than just generational trauma. They also gave you generational strength, and kind of, to speak to some of this resilience and perhaps adaptability and desire for adventure or striking out.
Yeah. And it's so funny. I've been doing some work on kind of investigating the cultural wealth of immigrant communities recently. And I think there's real power in speaking about our cultures and our traditions, our histories in that way. Because we, a lot of the time, coming to America, we're often taught by other cultures, or maybe the dominant culture, to view where we come from as a culture of deficit, of a culture of, things that are lacking, and we're always reminded of the things we don't have, the things we need to take from the dominant culture to succeed. But if we reframe that, and use our culture's experiences to our benefit, and recognize the strength that comes with that, and the resilience and the beauty and the, all that stuff, we can do so much better than we give ourselves credit for. We want to give ourselves credit for.
Love that reminder. And I believe just, from your book and things like that you mentioned your father was a lawyer. Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And mine was as well.
Oh, okay.
So, again, the parallels are uncanny, but my dad was also a lawyer. My mom was a CFO for a company in Chicago. She had a finance background from Shanghai. And, it actually sounds like perhaps my childhood, there was a little bit more heavy-handedness than maybe in yours, which was more like subconscious, one layer deep cues. Because mine were like, every single family, again, they're sitting me down as an only child. They're like, every family needs one lawyer, one finance guy, and one doctor. And they're like looking around, and then they're like, okay, well, so you're up.
It's
And again,
be
the thing,
Do it.
exactly. And the thing that we need to complete our family, and the thing that you have to shoulder as somebody who's an only child, they were like, best wishes, because that's the trifecta.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think, it sounds like yours was kind of more on the nose than mine. But I think for mine, I think, and this is credit to my family, I think they did their best to try to convince me of the amount of choice I had. I noticed this especially when I was choosing colleges, because I went to Harvard, but I didn't want to go to Harvard. I grew up in New York, in the school system there. If you're trying to get out of New York and go to good colleges, one of the main ways to do that, at least during my time there, was to get into the private school system in New York. And so I was able to do that kind of in the middle school sort of age, and then stay in the school that kind of fed us into pretty good colleges. And I thought I wanted to grow up and go to kind of a small liberal arts college, just kind of like my high school was, and like the Amherst or Wesleyan, like those sorts of things. But I applied to Harvard because my mom always wanted to see if I'd get in. And so I applied and I got in. And then they very much tried to convince me that I had a choice in whether I went. But even though ultimately, like, I decided it for myself, they were just like, cool, because we had like a full court press waiting, and if you were going to mess around with this.
Oh yeah, there was somebody like with handcuffs, like in the next room over, like he would have been stopped at the doorway probably, which understandably, because it's one incredible opportunity, of course, and I'm sure that the education that you received at the undergraduate level like was beyond incredible. But it is so funny to think about that, because of course if they said you have to go, then we would immediately often bristle at that and say, well, no, I'm not doing it. But kind of the ability to decide for yourself, allegedly, you just didn't take it to the point where you had to find out.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I'm glad. I was very, when I look back, I'm really happy that they did it in that way. It did give me some illusion of agency, which I'm sure was good for me developmentally somehow.
Oh, totally. And that's probably good parenting and definitely good negotiating. Like, I would want those people on my strategy team for tough negotiations. But I think that there's also this interesting element. It reminds me of some things that I've had to grapple with, just in terms of what is living out an immigrant parent's dream versus one's own. Because you did say that you applied to Harvard because your parents had, your mom wanted to see if you could get in. But at the end of the day, there's always this, I think that there is this coming of age process where we figure out our own identity. And part of that is the separation from the parent too. So it's like, who am I standing alone, not influenced by them? I guess I'll call back. I don't know if you've seen Gilmore Girls, but Lorelai Gilmore, hopefully like a lot of the audience has. I recommend Gilmore Girls, obviously, to everyone. Best fall cozy show ever. But Lorelai Gilmore, she's just this pretty self-assured woman, but she has some, we'll call them mom and dad issues. And she's loved Pop-Tarts her whole life. But she starts freaking out because she's like, she eats a whole box of Pop-Tarts, which obviously, her daughter's like, where did all the Pop-Tarts go? She's like, well, I had to try them because I don't know if I like what I like. If my mom had not told me as a kid, you can't have Pop-Tarts. We don't eat that stuff in this house. Would I still be on a full-time Pop-Tart diet? I don't know. And she's in her 30s, like grappling with this, having a full identity crisis.
Yeah. And I think I relate to that. I really do have to get into Gilmore Girls. All I know about Gilmore Girls is that they talk real fast to each other. That's kind of their style of dialogue.
Yeah.
But
it's very East Coast speed of talking, which, Yeah, I'm here for that. But yeah, it's interesting, the idea of when you kind of come into your own, and kind of let go of, what your parents wanted for you. And for me, it took a while.
I think I didn't start to come into my own. I don't think that process was really complete until kind of my mid 30s. I think, through through, of course, high school and college and through med school, I was kind of holding on to these conceptions of what success should be like for me, and how to think of my life as a success. And you kind of with medicine, I know with law and other kind of grad school based professions, you start out, you get on a train and you don't get off for 10 years, right? And by the time you get off, you got friends who have lived entire lives. They got kids, they got houses, on their second house or whatever, or they're already divorced, or they've lived these entire lives, and you've kind of been caught in this kind of perpetual adolescence until you're 30, and you're finally out in the real world, and you're finally like, oh, okay, I have to take care of myself for the first time. I'm not in school. I don't have a prescribed path forward for the first time. My parents aren't telling me what to do maybe for the first time. And
speak
now
for yourself.
I totally speak for myself. My parents still tried, but I started pushing back a little bit more. But it feels like, especially when you go into medicine, we start asking those questions of ourselves about who we are, what we really want. Not until we get to the end of the prescribed journey, and then we feel kind of out of place and out of time, and
Right.
it's kind of a weird feeling.
And that's so well said. I like to call it the conveyor belt. And I got on a conveyor belt at 18, which is when I decided to go to medical school. And I did not get off until really after residency, as you said. But I will say that in terms of the disillusionment that I experienced, it started in residency because, all of us in medical school were working so hard towards one goal. It's definitely the arrival fallacy to the max for all young physicians, because we work hard to get into medical school, hard to get into residency. But what happened for me personally is that I loved the grind. I honestly loved it. At the time in medical school, I was always like, oh my gosh, gunners are terrible. Like, don't be a gunner. And of course now, so many years later, I kind of look back and I'm like, what I was doing, sitting front row, being very involved, occasionally cutting other people off. Like, was I the gunner the whole time? Tina Fey has a 30 Rock bit about this, where she talks about how much she was bullied in high school. Yeah. And then, of course, at her high school reunion, she was just the bully the whole time. Certainly, hopefully not the case for my medical school experience, but I will say, I loved the grind. I loved being pimped. I loved learning. I loved to sit and lecture, etc. It wasn't until residency where I was on the conveyor belt, happy as a clam. Like, I've been a teacher's pet my whole life. I do well in structured academic environments. But having been in a malignant residency program that certainly did not prioritize learning, nor prioritize explaining things in a calm way, I found it very hard to learn when intimidated, afraid, someone's yelling. There's always the threat of yelling. There were instances of physical abuse, which we've talked about in other episodes of this podcast. So, that learning environment was very deranged, and it actually started the disillusionment process for me, because I was like, I've been on this conveyor belt. I did everything that everyone said to do. The scores were there. AOA, just do your residency, mind your own business and do residency. But I awoke, or, spiritually awoke to basically a dumpster fire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with that. Not agree with that, but I feel that sentiment. And for me, I always think about residency kind of as this perfect storm for type A personalities who have been, we've over the course of our lives, we've gotten really, really good at masking whatever our core issues are, whatever things we have about ourselves that we don't like or that are challenging to us, or, anything like that, where we become adept at covering those things up. So, because, we're able to succeed academically in spite of them. But once you get into residency training, the way it's set up is set up to kind of strip all your defenses away and kind of just leave you with yourself, and all the pieces that you may not really like, or you may have questions about, or you may be insecure about, and not really, it's there to break you down. It's not there to help build you back up. Just good luck to you.
But often even the leaders of teams, and you and I both having gone through ENT residency, we experience like the smaller department, which I do think at the end of the day is kind of core to a lot of the deranged situations that I've heard of from colleagues and things like that. Because, in a larger system, a larger department, maybe a medicine group or something like that, there are more checks and balances in place. There's ways to like maybe hide from one toxic personality. Well, in a tiny residency program, there is no hiding. This is like, your worst nightmare person could have unfettered access to you for months at a time, no breaks, and no professional rules in place for how you'll be treated. No protections for that.
I think you're right about that, because I think I know that many of my colleagues and friends who have gone through kind of residencies that are bigger, have more people, like ER or internal medicine. I think in general their experience has been different from mine, though I think they had some similar feelings about things. But there is something very specific, and it usually ends up being the surgical subspecialties that when every year they only take one or two of you, it's you guys, 8 to 10 people total, and then the entirety of the staff, and they're always watching all of you all the time. They're always talking about all of you all the time. They're kind of comparing you guys there, and of course, just like every specialty, every part of medicine, it's all policed by us. It's policed by doctors. Right. There's no recourse as far as how the rules are made. When doctors are policing themselves, then culture is very difficult to change or regulate.
Totally. And I was in a program that had 2 and 3 every alternating year. And I was part of a 3-year. And when I was in early second year, one of the attendings told me, unprompted, in clinic, we were just talking in between patients, and he kind of got on a tangent, and he was like, every year the attendings pick a resident who's the weakest to focus on and try to drive them out. And I was like, oh my God. Oh. And, but I've heard of that, and I've seen that in other departments at other institutions. Like, I heard about that first when I was looking at ENT like a decade ago at a completely different institution. So that's not unheard of, but I think that helps people, like, especially for those who haven't had an experience directly in medicine. It really doesn't make logical sense that like you could be nurtured your whole life as a person who is maybe a promising young surgeon or a promising young physician. And then in the residency microcosm, be like torn down and not supported and not built up in the way that like, if you win, then we all win. Like the department wins if they churn out really highly well-trained, well-adjusted surgeons. That's what I would personally think. But that,
Yeah, that's what makes sense. But I mean, just to jump into a situation where like you said, what they want to do instead of cultivate is weed out. Like, what's the point? Like, everyone's worked so hard to get there. They've worked so hard to prove that they can handle, however rigorous this is going to be. And so, honestly, when you look at the amount of things we need to learn, both from the books and in the operating room, you can teach those things without being an ass and like without, trying to break someone's spirit down in order to just pull them through. Like, like you said, like it doesn't reflect well on a program to lose residents or to fire them or for them to just drop off and disappear. But, they kind of, a lot of the bosses you want to say it's from an older generation, but honestly, it's not a generational thing. It's just a, cultural thing. And they could be young as, a couple of years older than us and still embrace that. They think it's about who can survive the gauntlet. Does that make you a better surgeon? Absolutely not. The gauntlet and the way the gauntlet's set up, no one seems to know the rules.
The rules change every day.
I will amend that. The rules change with time, but they also change with who you happen to be.
Yes. My gosh.
Because there's I think my experience was there's a set of rules. Some people kind of get told the rules and some people don't. And generally the people who get told the rules are the white guys, right? And because they're just kind of, that's the standard that everyone is trying to aspire to. And that's what the bosses want you to do. And if you're not that, then best of luck. You need to learn the rules somehow. And you get penalized for not learning them or knowing them. I would always wonder, especially in the first couple of years, I would be like, why? Because we had 2 each year.
Yeah.
My year was myself and my good friend, but he was my co-resident also, and he's a white guy from Detroit, and so he's I was like, why does he seem to always know where to be, what to be doing, how to talk to people, what the requirements are, of certain things, when I have no idea. It's not in a handbook anywhere. People just tell me to do stuff. I do it to the best of my ability, but it's always wrong. And he just happens to be always right. And I was like, is someone helping him, or are people actively not helping me? And it just it's enough to make you feel completely nuts, which doesn't help your performance. But, I ultimately learned from him years later that I wasn't wrong. They helped him quite a bit and told him lots of things that I was never told, and, would engage him in trying to tear me down too, like in the rooms where I wasn't allowed or didn't happen to be. And he, tried to be nice and not say bad things, but, never told me
right.
what was going on. He thought he convinced himself like that he was protecting me by not telling me about what was actually being said or being done. In reality, I was floating. I was on my own.
Right.
And it's just, we lose out on a lot of good doctors by setting up the rules in the system in that way.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that, because, it's probably not even super easy or fun, I think, to reflect on some of the less palatable parts of like the residency experience. But I appreciate you sharing that story, because there are people who may be experiencing that today who feel like they are floating relatively unsupported, especially in comparison to perhaps even co-residents and things like that. I do think that the gauntlet is fake. The gauntlet just benefits the people who are running the gauntlet. They just feel better about themselves. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite attendings in the world, he called this micropenis syndrome. He was like, if an attending is acting that way, right? He's putting people through the gauntlet. He's freaking out in the OR. He's screaming at people. He's belittling people. He told me in response to my tears about it, I came to him and he was like, that guy just has a micro penis and he's just showing it to you. So you can just accept that and you can just like move on. But that's really what it is. And so it did bring me a lot of comfort, because then for the next couple of years that I had left to finish, I at least had a word for it. I was like, okay, this is micro penis energy. And I would think that in response to somebody trying to, they're creating a fake gauntlet, throwing down a fake gauntlet, and we're having to jump through all these hoops. So I think that that's one helpful way to like, it's kind of an alternate rebellion tactic. Just think it privately. I probably wouldn't say it, particularly if you're still in training. So, don't misunderstand me. I would just think it to yourself. But another instance that it reminds me of to help illustrate and like flesh this out again for people who maybe haven't been there or they can't imagine how residents are viewed or treated differently. At the beginning of my residency in June, prior to the July 1 start, we as incoming interns had to show up and do various couple trainings, orientation. We had to renew our ACLS, BLS programming. And so I had one female co-resident and I had one white male co-resident. She was white as well. But the three of us showed up there. He had actually already trained at this institution. He was extremely beloved. He was from the state that we were all in now. She and I were transplants. I'm very much a transplant in the South. And what happened was we went to the ACLS, BLS. That involves CPR training, which for anyone who has done CPR training, we all get like a little sweaty doing it. I had a zip up jacket over a Costco tank top. It was like very thick straps. So, this was not a spaghetti tank top for the fashion police, for the hospital police. It was not like lewd in any way. It was just more of like a muscle tank that, maybe like the Fast and the Furious guys would wear. Like it was not revealing. And, I kept my coat on all day, except for about like a 15-minute period post CPR pre-lunch. I overheated. I took my zip up off. This was in an education building attached to the hospital, not in the hospital, not patient care related, of course. It was just a bunch of interns doing orientation. And I didn't think anything of it. And then by lunchtime, put my jacket back on, covered up these little arms, all is well. By the end of the day, I had actually received a notification from our department that said, hello, we received a complaint about you today. You violated the dress code policies for the hospital. I've reattached them to this email for your review.
Oh my
and of course
God,
I read them
dude.
and oh yeah. Oh, they got me day 1. That's like negative day 10 leading up to my residency experience.
Yeah, you're not even really there yet.
No, it wasn't even patient care. It was ACLS training. So even the people who I would have offended with my like pale shoulders, side shoulder, would have been other interns and then admin, some staff from the surgery department. But yeah, oh man, they reported me immediately. So that's how my residency experience started off. And of course I had to be like, I'm so sorry. You'll never see my side of shoulder again. That's on me. Here's what's so interesting. My co-resident, she's very good at hair and makeup. Like some people are just skillful at it. They've studied it. They know what to do. She is one of those people. At the end of that training day, we learned this, like you mentioned, we learned this like years later. Like this came up a couple years later. Maybe people were like drinking at a departmental event, which is like why it would have come up, because otherwise we didn't really like share these things. And our co-resident told us, he was like, I was actually quite uncomfortable because at the end of that CPR training day, that surgery admin woman who was running the whole show, he said she came up to me. And she loved him. She knew him from when he had rotated there before. So she came up to him and she was like, good luck. She was like, your co-residents, one looks like a hussy. That would be my co-resident. And the other one dresses like a whore. That would be me with my side shoulders out. Nice. And they were like, best wishes to you because like those girls, that is just rough. Like what a difficult hand you've been dealt. And he said, and he was very nice about it because he was like, I didn't engage. That obviously made me uncomfortable. This is like day 0 and I'm being pitted against you guys. I also don't have an issue with like women's makeup and appearance. I don't think he minded the side shoulder either. But I really think that story highlights it because think about like, all of us show up to residency. Let's just say, give the benefit of the doubt. All of us show up to residency very eager, very well-intentioned, want to just kill it and do our best and contribute to the team and take good care of patients. So imagine getting bogged down in this type of stuff.
I have a lot of thoughts about that story. And thank you for sharing that. I'm having some, some rage on your behalf. But it makes me think about two things. First is this reminds me of the conversation I had with my co-resident when he kind of told me years later what'd be going on. And it sounds like, this guy, he kind of came clean to you guys years later too. And I always wonder, and I asked him, what are you looking for here? You looking for, is this your apology? Are you looking for us to tell you it's okay that you experienced this? Like, this guy's like, oh man, I felt so uncomfortable. Well, what the did you do about it? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, what did you do? That's the thing. We're not here to, like, women in surgery and medicine, Black people in surgery and medicine. We're not here at the end of the day to assuage your guilt over that you've ostensibly been carrying the entire time. Okay. Like, so you chose to take that information. You chose to do absolutely nothing with it. You knew your co-residents were being targeted. You knew that you were in a position of privilege, being a favorite, because like a boss came up and told you this stuff, candidly. So you knew what kind of situation your cohort was in for. So what did you do? And the answer is so often nothing. But in the end, they want forgiveness. They want to feel like it was okay. Like, man, I felt a little weird.
Yeah,
like,
I experienced that with you because I was
give me a break with you feeling weird. I was, put on the red list, on my very first day in training. How do you think that makes me feel? Did you ever think about that? And I understand, from his perspective, like, you're all running scared. You're all trying to do your best. You all feel like you don't have any power and you just got to get ahead and just survive. I get that. But I don't forgive it because you had the power to at least show some compassion and show some empathy for the people that you're supposedly teammates with going through it. And that's kind of like how I felt with when my friend told me this years later. I was like, yeah, I'm not here to forgive you. So my question is, what are you going to do now, with your life? How are you going to make it up? What's the work you're going to do? I know what I had to do because in order for me to survive, I had to learn this game. I had to learn what was going on around me. I had to learn that what they actually wanted me to be was not me. They wanted me to be you. And I had to figure out, they don't want Tony at work. They want Tony's best impression of this other guy at work. And if I'm going to survive, I got to give that to them. And that took me a little while to realize. And what I did with that, because that's really hard, one, to realize, two, to live out every day. Because then you're just like, well, where do I go? Do I just disappear, in all of this? And the way I tried to stay connected was by kind of giving that information and giving that knowledge back to the folks who are coming up behind me, who I knew had to be going through this. So like there were, a lot of women coming up in the classes behind me, a lot of women of color coming up in the class behind me, and they would be struggling, and I could see it on their faces. I knew the struggle. And it was just like, what? If we can't change this situation, this world, then we're all going to know exactly where we're at, and we'll support each other to give them what they need, so that ultimately down the road we can make it better. But in the meantime, just you're not by yourself. You're not alone in this. Was the best I could do, even though I'm still struggling through it. But your co-resident who had it easy, do better, bro. Like, you got to do better.
Yeah, I know. It's a hard proposition when they don't have to do better, though. Like, he didn't
have to do better,
exactly. to survive, so he didn't. And so I get that. Like, probably all people want to sink to the lowest level of their, competence especially in a high stress situation like residency. But what I really love is how you made really effective changes in your own practice and you help the next generation behind you. Because at the end of the day, that's everything that I have worked on since I graduated from residency. Because
and you're doing all the work is fantastic. Even just this podcast, but everything else you do, it's kind of, you have your heart and your mind on this next generation. I know they appreciate it because it's so meaningful.
Thank you. And, I'm not saying you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but I get it if the old dogs don't care what I have to say or want to, consider some of what I'm proposing. Totally fine. I do think that these are very actionable, kind of like effective strategies, and like the strategies that you handed on to your junior residents that are like survival strategies in a broken system. But like we talked about, I do think that the end goal is break the wheel, break the gauntlet, right? Because in terms of people who I think could have also behaved better think about the department in that scenario where I talk about. So I get a quite harshly worded email from the department that says, you violated the dress code today. That's interesting because by the letter of the law, my dad's a lawyer, right? Our dads are lawyers. So by the letter of the law, I actually did it because that dress code applies to patient care areas and the hospital. And I was in an adjacent educational building. I just think that it really shows the departmental culture, which is like a very top down, like that's how they view their residents. And I can envision other scenarios where those types of complaints would even be dismissed. Where the department might say, I've received your complaint. I understand that you're saying that somebody wore a tank top for 10 minutes in a educational area prior to their start date of July 1, by the way, via the contract, and I'm just going to drop it. But the way that they handle those things says a lot about their character and also their values.
Absolutely. That's the thing with kind of changing these institutions. I mean, eventually the old dogs are going to be gone, and so what do our contemporaries do with it? I remember kind of thinking, as I was going through, we had the way feedback comes to you in residency is really interesting because the bosses, they rarely speak directly to you. Sometimes they do, but especially if the stuff they don't like, they never tell you to your face, which they should, because that's otherwise. I mean, that's too hard for them. They're too fragile. So
but they'll tell everyone. They'll tell the script
tell everyone.
They'll tell the circulators.
Yeah, they'll tell everyone. They'll trash talk you to everybody, but the person whose responsibility it is to actually tell you what's wrong is your senior resident or your chief, right? They're just like, oh, this is part of your job. I hate the way this intern does this. Fix it. You know what I mean? But there when you're a chief, this is what I learned when I was a chief, there's where you actually can start changing the culture of what everyone's experiencing. Because you can be like, okay, I'm just going to be the mouthpiece of my bosses and be like, they think this is trash. Like, I don't know, you got to fix this. But what I would do, like I knew kind of their game. I knew what they were trying to do. I knew we call it in entertainment, I knew the note behind the note, I knew what they were trying to say. And so was it necessary for me to share every single trashy thing they said with the person they were talking about? Absolutely not. What would be helpful to this person who's trying to survive? Well, I could explain to them like, hey, guess what? This isn't about you. Okay. And I wouldn't even tell them like this sort of thing is being said. I was like, okay, here are the expectations, however unfair they seem. Okay. And here are the perceptions that bosses are bringing in, however unfair they seem. Okay. Here's what we can do, and I will advocate for you. Like, I never engage in talking trash to the bosses. when they do it to me. But I got to be there for you, and my word in some way can be powerful now. So let's work together to help you not only survive this thing, but let's crack the code on making you look good so that I can tell them, man, they're looking good right now. And I know you can't deny it because this is exactly what you told me you wanted to see. And, I'll do my part, you do your part, so we can kind of, move through this together. Being a leader, I think, and thinking compassionately in that way is really, really important. And that's just something I got from like other parts of my life where I just, I've lived other lives. I've done different things with my life, but there's no requirement of leadership skills, in medicine, even though at some point all doctors are looked at as leaders of people or teams or communities and that sort of thing. And I think that's a shame because a lot of doctors are not good at it, but it's really not hard to be at least halfway decent if you want to put the work in.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head because you were really a different type of chief, and that's how we start to break the wheel. But especially for people like we talked about who don't have like a vested interest in becoming better people, like they do well without all that extra work. I get it. But for those of us where it's not really a choice, like you just have to be better. You have to be clever, faster, more resilient, more agile. Like you just have to do it. So we do it to survive, like out of necessity. I really appreciate this conversation. We could talk about this all day, but I do want to make sure that we hit a really intriguing part of your life journey, which was the transition after several years of ENT practice out in California to television writer. And then, of course, author, and now you do so much varied work in the writing world.
Yeah. I've kind of become the patron saint of quitting medicine to a lot of my friends. It's a title I'm very proud of because I decided that after working, in private practice for like 3 years after residency was done, that I wasn't happy. I wasn't enjoying it. And I needed something else. And, I wasn't sure what that was going to be. But in the back of my mind, and I think this is part of the reason why I moved from Detroit to Los Angeles, in the back of my mind, I was like, I always kind of wanted to be adjacent to the entertainment world. Like, I thought that the things that I love, because I'm an artist, first and foremost, that's the kind of part of me I had to respectfully reawaken in order to kind of to survive residency, because I kind of stuffed it down. But being an artist is really important to my identity. And I always thought there had to be some way for me to be an artist and utilize the life experience that I'd had as a physician in order to hopefully, help teach people. And because that's another big part of my identity is being an educator. And so, one day I was about to quit my job. I'd already told him I was going to quit. I didn't have a new job lined up. So that was super fun. But then I was like on Facebook one day and I just saw this ad for being a, consultant for Grey's Anatomy. And I emailed them and I went for an interview and I got the job. And it was, it's like being an intern. You make like peanuts. And I was there for like 4 months. And I just lived off my savings. But I got to spend every day in the writer's room for Grey's Anatomy and like just walk around their set all day and help out on their set and like do all this stuff, and was totally had my eyes totally open to this.
That's awesome.
This profession that I had no idea existed. And
what were the hours like for that? Just for that 4-month stint?
Great compared to what we usually do.
Yeah.
It's just like, people in entertainment don't start working until 10 in the morning. So you show up at 10. And then, on most days, the writers, they're kind of out of juice creatively by like 4 or 5, and they just wrap it up, and throughout the day there's breaks, there's snacks, they're eating all the time. They got to take a long lunch because like it's hard to keep the juices flowing. So they got to be
That's
able
amazing.
to do all that stuff. And sometimes you have late nights, but for the majority of the time, like these are not hours that we are used to as doctors. And I was like, this is easy and really fun. And also like, I just love the power of this medium. And so like, how can I get like you guys? Like, is there a path to doing this as a job? And luckily, there were a lot of people on that staff for whom writing was kind of their second act. They'd had full careers elsewhere before they started writing, and so they kind of took me under their wing and showed me kind of how to engage in it and how to start writing and learn all the things I needed to learn. And so that kind of transitioned into my next job at the Resident, where I wasn't just consulting, I was writing episodes. And, I'm currently in the process of working on my TV adaptation of my book and hoping that moves along somehow. But yeah, that was kind of my transition. It's kind of a few, good coincidences. And, but I was also I put myself in the right position to be in the right place. And I was ready for that kind of adventure. So, that's the short story.
That's amazing. Well, I love that you're the patron saint of leaving medicine, just because, again, cool job title. You should have people announce you that way when you enter rooms. Ooh, I could see I can see a candle, for instance, in the line of
yeah,
I see that 1,000,000%.
That's okay. Yeah, I like that. But yeah, I just love, because like a lot of friends of mine, like people who I was in residency with, they've called me at over the years, and they were just like, I don't know who else to call, but we haven't talked in a long time. But is it okay to leave? Helping people give themselves permission to leave and recognize that all the work they've done, the money they've spent, the hours they've put in is not going to waste. You're tending to your life, you're tending to your garden, your wellness, your brain, and your happiness. And whatever path you choose, like you're going to bring the lessons that you had from all of your experience that came before. Don't listen to anybody who tries to scare you into not taking a jump, because you don't want to wait too long either. There's always an excuse not to jump.
And that's incredible. Like your friends are obviously very lucky to know and have you to reach out to for that question. I think it just shows, though, how little discourse there is about it and how deeply, tied up and emotional the decision is, because it's so funny. Like nobody else in any other job, in any other scenario, would a grown adult call like an acquaintance or, someone, especially who they aren't very close to, and be like, hey, I have a secret question. The secret question is, could I leave? And, and then you like counsel them very brilliantly, but like, it's crazy because a lot of people don't have like trusted advisors in their life or people who could understand or grapple with that question or help them like really go through that decision-making process, which is an important one for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. If anybody out there wants to leave, you can feel free to find me on the internet. I'm happy to chat with you anytime.
Absolutely. I do want to share a couple quotes just because, I love my quote wall. I'm a big quote person. I've always got quotes for things, but a couple that I love. Well, this one is, better to admit that you walked through the wrong door than spend your life in the wrong room.
Mm-hmm.
I really love that. And maybe this one will resonate with you, but I decided to reimagine my survival as a creative act.
Really?
And I really love that. I think like a lot of physicians are also artists, and it's very true that the conventional, U.S. medical training system, it does tend to try and kill the artist within. And so I think that I just so appreciate you having this discussion and allowing us to just kind of play with what that can look like, what being a physician who still has love for the arts looks like, what the transition between the two There are people, a rarer track, but there are artists who go back to school later and become physicians. So certainly not one size fits all.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad that I could I hope that hearing these sorts of stories, these different paths can help, those of us who are going through and trying to figure out what we want to do with ourselves and what we want to do with our lives, especially those of us going through the medical training world. There's so many more options than they'd have you believe. So really just embrace the fact that whatever it is you love to do, you can find a way to mesh it in a way that makes your life feel fulfilled.
And to build on that, they benefit from you thinking that you have no options. So it's so important. We always try to say, okay, zoom out a little bit. Brings me to my final quote here is, if anyone is magically going to appear and suddenly make your life better, just know that person is always going to be you.
That's right.
So
we gotta stick up for and take care of ourselves. It's a really hard lesson.
So I'd love to go into our final segment, which is, do you believe in karma?
I think so. I think I believe in karma.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Any case for or against?
I tend to believe in good karma. I try not to dwell on or hope for bad karma for people, but I do think that good things tend to come back around.
I love that, and I certainly hope so. So thank you again so much for coming on and sharing your journey with us today. It is truly just such a privilege. It's so fun to talk to you always. I'd love to share, where can our listeners find your memoir, I Can't Save You, and then also connect with you online or reach out to you if they have any questions?
Yeah. So you can find I Can't Save You anywhere you get your books. You can get on Amazon or what have you. I recommend finding your independent bookstores and asking them if they have a copy, because hopefully they should. And if you want to find me online, I am on Instagram. You can find me if you search my name, Tony Chin-quee. I'm on there. And I'm also on Twitter as well, under Anthony Chin-quee. It's at CQ__MD. It's one of those, annoying ones. But yeah, if you look for Chin-quee, there's not that many of us. So you can find me.
Follow me on Instagram at francesmei.md and at Rethinking Residency. Visit my website, rethinkingresidency.com, to learn more about resident physician stories and ways that residents can most effectively navigate the game of residency. I cannot wait to connect with you on the next episode of Promising Young Surgeon.